All right, we are
Great.
recording. Go ahead, Kimberly.
Thank you very much. So again, I'm Kimberly Frary, and I'm here with Amy Nyman today, and we are going to tag team a little bit. I'm going to be presenting kind of the major concepts and some examples, and Amy will also share an example. So, what we'll be talking about today is this idea of data to action or using rapid feedback. And this can be something in our organization, just to improve the way that we work together, or it can be something that's used in evaluation practices. And just to start, I was thinking about this in preparing for it, and we've always called it data to action because there's this emphasis of how do we use information to actually make decisions and take actions. But the other part of it I just want to point out is it could be called data for action, that we really are either collecting data or using data that we already have. That means information about the work that we're doing or our organization, specifically to be able to take actions. So we hope that all data results in some kinds of actions, but this is sort of the mindfulness that we bring to this. So just to start out, we always like to ask, as I know we're not a giant crew here, but maybe if you want to just drop in the chat, one thing that you'd like to get from today's webinar, just based on what you understand from the description and maybe just what I've introduced, or your ideas about data to action and rapid feedback. And maybe Catherine can help us um, collect those while Amy and I introduce ourselves by way of today. We're going to introduce ourselves by way of what's influenced our evaluation work and rapid feedback work. And for me, you see here kind of three major influences. Early in my career, I worked on a project with a business school and school of public health, trying to help public health practitioners have more savvy and be more entrepreneurial. And a lot of the way that business works in using feedback has influenced my thinking. I've also worked with teams, particularly in the IT space that I know nothing about, that do work in what they call agile methods. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And again, when I saw the way that we were working together, I was like, this is exactly like rapid feedback. And of course, one of my great teachers, who's at Insight for Action, Rhonda Zaycox, who was the lead author for this, the article that kind of informs some of this work as well as utilization focused evaluation. But Amy, I'm curious, what are some of your influences in the evaluation space?
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Nyman, and I'm in charge of the evaluation, along with Kimberly, for the Georgia State PRC. I am definitely newer to evaluation than Kimberly is. I started with the PRC in about 2022, halfway through the last cycle. And before that, I had worked on another evaluation project for the American Cancer Society and evaluating their tobacco-free generation campus initiative and looking at grants that were given to college campuses to adopt and implement tobacco-free policies. And that stemmed from my many years before that working in research, mostly survey research in tobacco control. So, research has been something that, I've been working in a long time. I'm newer to evaluation, but obviously research and evaluation have a lot in common and understanding how things are going, understanding what's happening in a particular space. So I've been very much influenced by the CDC evaluation team, the other PRC evaluators, and our own team, of course. Kimberly's expertise has been really valuable to me as well. So I guess that's a few of my influences.
Great, thanks. Well, we can influence each other. So that's great. There's a connection, of course, to research, and there's a strong connection to practice. And today we're going to really focus more on the practice end of things. And I hope what you'll take away is whether or not you're doing like a full evaluation of something. These are practices that we can use in our everyday work. So, what we'd like to do is explain how rapid feedback improves organizations and projects, describe how it can help build evaluation practices, and identify how your organization uses feedback uh, for future and thinks about future actions. So let me just pause and see, Catherine, anything in the chat you want to lift up?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like those who are here are really looking to learn something new, learn more about evaluation. I really like this one. It's this comment says looking for a quick way to get data and how to use them to move forward and make new plans. And another one that emphasizes, how looking for how to have community organizations evaluate their work and how researchers can support those efforts.
Oh,
So
that's
anyone
great.
who's just joined, feel free to put what else you'd like to get out of
Yeah.
today in the chat.
Great. And we can always loop back on that. Well, I think we are going to cover some of that, particularly thinking about the practices piece. And what I want to say is researchers absolutely can support this work. And in fact, some of this you'll see is working with researchers to have a very applied space in practice. So, what I want to start with is this idea. Some of you may know Adam Grant, who's an organizational psychologist at Wharton Business School. I follow Adam Grant on LinkedIn, and every day I read something I probably should be doing to be more effective. But he has this blog, and he posted this comment. In your career, I would say in your organization, the most valuable currency is not how much you know, it's how well you learn. In a stable world, maybe early 20th century, sometimes people think of that as sort of a more stable time, success depended on building expertise. In a changing world, certainly our world today, it hinges on evolving expertise. So potential is no longer defined by our ability, it's a function of agility. And what we mean by agility is really the ability to think, understand, and move quickly. So I appreciate this idea of like quick data, practical data, credible data. So I mentioned some of my influences. And so what I particularly learned from Agile methods working with these people in IT, where they do like 2 week sprints. And then have some kind of reflection and using data, see like what's working well and what isn't. That is very much an oversimplification, but if you're interested in it, I have some resources at the end. But really, what I learned is it's more of a mindset than a method, right? So we think of having to be an expert in methods. It's an orientation to improvement, continuous improvement. And they really think about how do we get the greatest value for everyone involved. It's called value-based. We often in our world, because we're funded to produce certain deliverables or certain services, we have more of like a deliverable-based idea, right? That we meet those targets. But I think it's helpful to think about in other spaces. People really think about what's the greatest value, and that creating feedback loops really helps us assess, are we getting the greatest value? So I am a Star Wars fan, but I could be totally out of my depth here. But the character that really symbolizes this idea is Master Yoda from Star Trek. And of course, he's famous for saying things backwards. And Yoda says, do or not, or do not. There is no try. And the idea here is that when we're in this kind of mindset, we can commit to actions because they're informed by the information that we have, and that we're in this continuous improvement. And then what I learned from working with people in business, these entrepreneurs that were trying to help us in public health, is that they really don't see failures as failures. They see them as learning opportunities. So often we're kind of primed to think about, oh, I can't really make this mistake. Again, often driven by funders, and I've been on that funder side, so I know what that power dynamic looks like on both sides. But the other thing is they just can't believe in a lot of the work. And again, I'm talking in the public health space, other related spaces, social services. They think you should always have an exit strategy or at least a way to adjust. That you don't just start doing something and then stick to it no matter what you're learning, right? And again, feedback is essential to this, to the next great idea. So the main point before I actually get into the framework that we're going to talk about is a lot of people who have looked at this really have found that when feedback is infrequent and it's only reactive, often to things that are negative, it can promote fear and drain energy, and particularly in an organization. If that's the only time you get feedback is when you do something wrong, or if it's corrective, it really just kind of is this thing that we become afraid of, right? That we associate with negative emotions. But when feedback is a regular part of how we do our work, it can promote agility. It can promote this ability to move quickly, to take in things, make adjustments. So you think about really what it means to feed or provide information, energy, whatever it is, back into our whole system, often our organization or a project. And so another great organizational guru, leadership developer, Jim Collins, who wrote the book Good to Great, uses this um, uh, idea of a flywheel, which is part of an engine or a lot of things, and it's literally a wheel. And the idea is the more that wheel turns, the easier it is to turn, the faster it turns, and the more the energy behind it just keeps it moving. So all of us in the work that we do can have this flywheel effect where if we use feedback to continually improve, it just becomes easier as we go, and it becomes sort of less of a slog or less of something to be afraid of. So think about feedback. Well, what does feedback mean in your organization? What are some of the ways that you generate feedback? Could be about your own work, the projects that you do, services you provide, teaching that you do. Curious about your ideas. And
You
if
want
you
me
could put that
to
in the chat.
in the chat? Okay.
Yeah,
That was my
sorry.
question.
Somehow that came off of the slide, but if you could put that in the chat. And again, we'll check back with Catherine to see some of the ideas that you have about the ways that you generate feedback. And while we're waiting for that, we'll just say as an entry into the data to action framework that I'm going to talk about today, some of it is that when feedback is designed, and that's part of it is sort of how it's designed and delivered, it can bridge past, present, and future actions. So in particular, it can help us set the stage for work that we're doing. It can generate kind of data and insights into that data, and ultimately choose pathways to action. So again, leading us to act. Some of you are familiar with this like plan, do, study, act cycle. It's a common improvement cycle that's often used. And my point here is that sometimes the hardest part is moving from studying something, so gathering data basically and learn and having information to reflect on and actually taking action. And so the framework that I am going to talk about today was really designed with that in mind and designed to think about how can we actually help organizations move from learning something and taking action on it and doing that fairly quickly. Rapid is a relative term. I was in an organization at one time. Rapid, could mean a couple of months. In some other kinds of organizational contexts, it can mean, well, we can act this week on information that we're learning. So, the framework that I will be talking through, and I'm going to talk through each one of these steps, and then we're going to talk through a few examples so that it can make it a little bit more concrete. But this is the data to action framework. Data to action is a term in the past 10 years, I would say, that is used more and more. And sometimes it's used to talk about like surveillance data or data on populations that is then used to design programs, strategies, policies. In this case, we're really talking about being inside a strategy, an initiative, and working within or an organization overall, and looking at what's happening in the context of that organization and using data for improvement. And there are some things that we'll talk about in terms of what that means. There's a lot of evidence that shows actually focusing on continuous improvement can drive better outcomes overall. So if we think about we're in an organization that's a science-based organization or one where you have to report to a funder what the outcomes are. One case for this is that focusing on data to action can actually help improve outcomes. So the 5 steps that I'll talk about are clarifying the intent. So this is for a rapid feedback cycle. You want to clarify your intent, collect good enough data. I'll talk about what that means. Produce a brief memo, engage in a reflective debrief, and make decisions. So before I go into each of those steps, let's get back to Catherine and see if we have things that are coming up in the chat about ways in which people use feedback or receive feedback in their organizations.
So it looks like what we have in the chat in terms of, I think, mostly the ways in which feedback is collected and received. One is active listening from members of the team. Another is facilitating discussions during meetings with partners and collecting feedback with surveys and professional evaluation. And then we had one question that was asking whether we mean soliciting feedback from others or giving each other feedback.
Yeah, and I would say it can include both. Yes. So sometimes if you're talking about this is like my team that I work with in an organization, you might be giving feedback to one another on something that you're working on. It could also mean collecting feedback from others that are somehow impacted by your work, whether they're participating in services or an initiative, or they might even be kind of leaders in the organization to understand kind of how they're experiencing it. So, yeah, great question.
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep the questions coming. Thank you for those that responded. And again, I'm going to talk through each of these fairly quickly because we want to get to the examples. But you also will have these slides. We'll send out the slides. And so in part, they're for your reference later as well. For each of them, I think in questions. So for each of these, I'm going to describe sort of what it means in terms of the questions we might ask our team, our organization, when we're getting ready for a rapid feedback cycle, a data to action cycle, and to set ourselves up. And then I'll talk about some tips based on things that I've learned and others, and we learned in particular on the one initiative where we did a really comprehensive integration of rapid feedback, fully acknowledging that in most of my work, we can't do it to the extent that we did it there, but we've still found ways to integrate it. So clarifying the intent is this idea of really being clear if you're going to, particularly if you're going to collect new data, of why you're doing it. What is our purpose here? And then how you will use it. How are we going to use this information specifically, and who is going to use it? And in particular, we talk about this idea of a primary audience. Sometimes I use the term user, but not everybody likes that term. But it really, a primary audience is someone, a group, a team, leaders, yourself, if you're part of, driving decisions, you're using it to make a decision and take action. And the difference between those two is sometimes our decision is to take no action, and we'll show you an example of that. But most of the time it's to do something. And so the tips here for this first part is really to be intentional and to create documentation, which you will definitely use later. So the tip is to write it down, draft even just a one-page description. Here's what our team agrees is our purpose, who's going to use it. These are the questions that the people who are going to use it care about. What might be our data collection, even if it's using data we already have, existing program data, for example. And then who's going to do what, right, in a timely manner. The second step is collect good enough data. Well, what does good enough data mean? Some of us work in organizations where we have a lot of people who are trained on all of the caveats and assumptions behind different methods and data collection. And we kind of have to step back and say, we might not be able to do the most rigorous design in this, but what's really important is that we actually get information that we can act on and use. And often that can be, again, data we're already generating in our everyday work. So the question that we want to ask is, will it be credible to our primary audiences for the purpose that we have for it? Is it feasible to collect? And is it likely that we can make decisions and act, based on what we learn? So again, the tips here is write down how you'll use it to inform decisions. That might be part of the last step that we took. And to just ask people who are going to use the data, what's good enough to take action. So again, credible, good enough is that it might not be everything that we want in terms of how maybe we've learned how to collect information, but it is collected in a way methodically that we can trust what we find to likely be to respond to the question that we have. The next step is to produce a brief memo. We call it a memo. And the reason that we named it that is because some people, when you say a data report, they really think it has to be this super formal polished production. But a memo could be something that looks more like a brief or an actual memo. And this is really to summarize what you learn once you've actually laid out data that you've collected. What are the main findings and how does this information actually answer our questions? So this is what we want to include. And the idea here is part of what makes it rapid is we don't get bogged down in all the details and all the caveats about the limits of the data. It's not to say that we don't acknowledge that there are those, but the brief is really designed for people who are going to make decisions, and often they can read one page, maybe 2 pages, or even for ourselves. So we might have a longer version when I've generated it with my project team, and then we create a shorter version, right, for leaders that are going to have to actually look at it to make it visually appealing. And here's where the rapid comes in. Distribute soon after data is collected. So it's not something that we like sit on and wait until kind of the end of a cycle of a project. We really try to get it out as soon as possible. And then engaging in a reflective debrief. And here, if any of you were at the Liberating Structures webinar, there's one called the What, So What Now What. So this is kind of informed by this idea. And here's where we start to get into the idea of like, how do we actually take what we've learned and move it into action? So we can ask, what are we actually learning here? What does this really say? What does it mean for our project or our organization? And what actions should we take? So it really means that we kind of start with sense making and insights from the beginning. This is usually done through conversation. It can be a regular organization, team, project meeting, or ideally you can make additional time to actually do this, but recognizing that's not always possible. You can use your 1 to 2 pager, the one that you created at the beginning that has all your intentions, uses, users laid out to remind you what you said you were going to actually do with the findings. And I've been amazed at how effective that actually is because we do forget. And so we start to get a little bit abstract. But when we have that as our anchor, we can come back to that and say, is this still relevant for us? Does this still bring us value? And then to really, in that same document, write down the actions. And the final thing is to make decisions. And typically there's 3 decisions that we make, right? Sometimes we do think we need to have more information before we can take action. Certainly that's realistic. We can decide not to take any action, or hopefully most of the time, we say there's some action that we can take to make some adjustment. This is telling us something. And the tips here are really where the places, again, where people sometimes get stuck. And I'm saying this as I worked in my own projects. And then when I worked in sort of helping organizations develop strategy using data, is it can just seem really overwhelming to try and think about everything that you need to do. So one idea is to divide it into easy changes and bigger lifts. And I'm going to show you in a minute just one way that can be done. And then to track changes you make in your memo, and to definitely celebrate accomplishments. So definitely this has an orientation where we want to learn and improve, but we also want to appreciate what we've done right. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but some of you may have seen this activity prioritization. So one way, when we get to our actions, we might say, okay, there's some things here that we know are quick wins. Like we can do this in the next month, right? We can make these small adjustments. There are some things, and here you have on the axes the level of effort and importance. You could have other things, but these two tend to be things that often influence whether we act on something. So there's some things that may be really, really important, but they take a lot of effort. And so we can kind of put them in there knowing, okay, we will get to these, but they might not be the first things that we get to. And then things that we can think about, are they actually kind of low effort, but a low, not that important or impactful? And then our least favorite, the thankless tasks because they take a lot of effort. So that's just one way. And this is what I'm suggesting often when we have our memo, maybe even we process it a little in our smaller team and we're taking it to others, it's a tool that you can use. So I'm going to quickly talk through a very specific example, and then Amy's going to talk through another example. This is an example from a project I worked on several years ago, and actually we developed the data to action framework from this project. The only thing I really wanted to show you here is all the way on the left-hand side these are the supports we provided. This is basically what we delivered. And so all of our feedback cycles really were around the things that we were delivering and how people were experiencing them, using them, were they useful. So I'm going to talk through this one on the online workstation. This project was with domestic violence coalitions. We were trying to scale up something that had been funded with federal dollars for many years with 14 state coalitions, also working with local organizations. And we got money from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to bring in 19 more coalitions with a lot less money, but we had a lot more resources in terms of what we could offer people. And the idea, the overall idea, the purpose of the project is to work with these organizations that were primarily serving survivors of domestic violence and providing services kind of at that end and when I mean that end, what some people call tertiary prevention, or really after violence has happened, and try to get them to integrate more initiatives and practices related to preventing violence. So that was the goal of the program. And we already had a history with these other coalitions, so we knew some things that they did and worked. And so we set up this program. And one of the things that we had that people will be familiar with is this SharePoint workstation. And just like many projects, we made the same mistakes and good things around it, which is if you are funded in an organization by multiple funders, they all have some kind of SharePoint workstation that they want you to use that isn't connected to other work that you're doing. And hearing that frustration, we try to really think about, okay, we have this as a resource because we want people to track what they're doing, but we need to learn how it's working. So this was a space where there were discussion boards, so you could talk with other participants, post documents, there was a calendar, and then we also tracked what are the changes that they're making in their organization and in their prevention activities. So we had a really creative project coordinator who does improv. If you're in Atlanta, you know Dad's Garage. This person was like really good at on-site meetings, but also came up with really creative ideas. And one idea that she had was every Wednesday, she would send out an email and say, come to the workstation. And she would come up with some kind of puzzle or game, a riddle to entice people that they would have to go to the workstation to find. And people love this. We would hear on technical assistance calls or when we met, we just love Workstation Wednesday. And so we wanted to know, well, how are people actually using the workstation? Are they using it? And does Workstation Wednesday actually drive people, there? Because she would spend one day every week just doing this, right? And we were a very small staff. So one day of somebody's time was a lot of time. So we did a feedback cycle and we started with, our question, clarifying the intent, knowing that we were going to use this to decide if we needed to adjust. And what we did is the nice thing about these online spaces is they produce metrics, right? That you can just look at. So great use of data that already exists, right? It told us everywhere that people went. And so we looked at usage before and after Workstation Wednesdays for 3 months, and we happened to do it another 3 months after. We also, another great data source for rapid feedback is just using opportunities where participants of whatever you're doing, whether in your own organization or participants in an initiative you're implementing, where they already gather. And so we had an on-site meeting, and so we also interviewed participants. Basically, the evaluator we worked with sat at lunchtime and talked with people. So we didn't have a big separate focus group or have to call people on phone. She just went around to the meeting and would say, "Hey, do you think we could talk at lunchtime?" And so any particular organization, she would just sit with them at lunch and have a set of questions, and she asked them all the same questions. So then we produced brief memos. There were two because one was only on Workstation Wednesdays. This was a really big thing. And just the bottom line of what we found is yes, people loved Workstation Wednesday, but they were not using the workstation except for the calendar. So we were expending a lot of resources in trying to promote the idea. People loved it. So this is the idea sometimes satisfaction doesn't actually equal, changes in how people are behaving. And so we had to make a decision when we reflected in our debrief that, basically no more Workstation Wednesday. Like we needed this person's time to really be spent on other things, even though people loved it. We also said, if people aren't using it for how we intend, which is basically to communicate with each other and us, let's just use what they've told us as their preferred channels. We know it's not, our ideal, but it's theirs. But we also said, let's continue to use it to post documents because people also occasionally do want to have a site where they can go and refer to that. So that's one example. I'm going to now turn it over to Amy, who's going to talk through a recent example in our own work. And so, Amy, I will over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kimberly. I'm going to talk through an example from our Georgia State PRC that I think we might have one or two CAB members on the call, and this might look familiar to them. But for the rest of you, I'll explain. So as Catherine mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, for those of you, if you're not familiar at all with the Georgia State PRC, our PRC is based in Clarkston, Georgia, which is a very diverse city, often called the most diverse square mile in America, very large refugee, immigrant, and migrant population. And so all of that, makes it a very unique community, and, also has some unique challenges for trying to do research. And our core research project for this cycle of the PRC is to develop an intervention that combats loneliness and social isolation and promotes social connectedness in Clarkston. So that's just kind of the background. And so also those of you who might be involved with PRC evaluation may know that in this cycle, we've been asked to evaluate our community engagement approach to the core research project. So we're in the process of trying to develop an evaluation plan to accomplish that. And we wanted to start by involving the CAB in working on the evaluation plan. So we picked an upcoming in-person CAB meeting back in just a few months ago in the spring, where we could get quick feedback from CAB members on what community engagement activities we could prioritize. So that's kind of the background. So our goal here was to evaluate community engagement in relation to our research plan. And the process we used was we did this prioritization exercise. So we came to the CAB meeting with 9 core research project implementation activities. These were things that we already knew we were going to do in our research project. And all of these activities involve community members in some way. So we, had already planned to involve Clarkston community members in different aspects of the implementation of the research project. But what we wanted to do was to figure out, maybe which of these activities did the CAB feel were the most important to prioritize. So we engaged in this modified version of evaluator David Fetterman's empowerment evaluation. And if you're interested in evaluation at all and you are unfamiliar with him, I highly encourage you to go to this website. I don't think you can click on it from the presentation, but if you're interested, you can make note of this website. He has a lot of interesting ideas and really great recommendations. So because we only had the span of maybe 1 to 2 hours in a CAB meeting, we couldn't really do the full empowerment evaluation. So we did this modified version, which involved giving each CAB member, well, first we explained what the implementation activities were. And then we gave each CAB member these 5 dot stickers, which you can kind of see on this little picture here, those little orange dots. And we had them, well, first we posted the different activities on poster paper around the room. And then we had CAB members go up with their 5 dots and place them on the things that they felt were most important to prioritize for community engagement. So how did they feel, what did they feel were the best ways to involve community members in these activities or in the research project? And since they had 5 dot stickers, if they felt that one activity was, far more important than anything else, they could put all 5 of their stickers on one activity. If they felt 5 were equally important, they could put one on each. So, and anywhere in between. So we arrived at, this is just a picture of, we kind of, we tallied everything up at the end. This is just a few of them. And we had one of our CAB co-chairs lead a discussion among the CAB about why did the ones that scored the highest, in fact, score highest, and really what would a successful community PRC collaboration look like with each of these activities. Next slide, please. So here are the results, and you can see the rows are the 9 different activities we had. And as you can see, 3 of them really stood out above the others, got the most votes. Those are the ones in green. Gathering focus group feedback. This is in the like formative research where we're trying to hold focus groups to develop the interventions. And this involves hiring and training community members who will lead focus groups with participants who, they would lead them in the native language of the participants in that group. And building program awareness, which would be promoting the intervention, promoting the project to the community and trying to help us to reach the people who would most benefit from being a part of this research project. And then incorporating community knowledge, which is something that we, of course, will try to thread throughout the duration of the project, which is really just continuous feedback between the community and the research team. So the research team is always aware of what's going on in the community when it comes to the problems of social isolation and loneliness and anything that's coming up, just to constantly be in touch. Next slide, please. So here's just a table that kind of maps on what we did to this data to action or data for action framework. Clarifying intent, we presented these community engagement activities at a monthly CAB meeting. We mentioned to the CAB that we wanted to establish establish the priorities that would benefit the community, with the CAB being a proxy for the community. Collecting good enough data. Obviously we were doing this at a 1 to 2 hour CAB meeting. So, we could only do so much in that amount of time. But we collected the data via live voting during the CAB meeting and the ensuing discussion. Producing the brief memo. So within a week or 2 after the meeting, we did summarize our results and we distributed those to the CAB members as soon as we could. Engaging in reflective debrief. Now, I think probably, ideally we would have had another meeting to be able to discuss all of this. We did do a little bit of discussion during the CAB meeting that we had. If we had had more time, it might have been better. So we kind of had to do this during, via email afterwards. We only have CAB meetings once a month, and we had other business to attend to, so we needed to just handle this via email. But we did ask the CAB members if they could contribute any next steps or ways to kind of enhance the activities that would benefit community members. And then finally, making decisions, we ended up with this list of prioritized activities that we are going to be certain that we make sure that we prioritize community engagement in particular in these three. I mean, we will with all of them, but especially these three, and we'll be monitoring those in the program evaluation. We're in the process of working on a logic model right now that includes those activities, and we're ensuring that we understand what the outputs are from those activities, and then the short, medium, and long-term outcomes from doing this with the community. So yeah, that's what we did.
That's great. And I love that what this shows is, we could have said, well, all 9 of these are important. It's what we said that we were going to do. But it gives some information on, well, what from the perspective of the CAB, right, lifts up. Not that, again, as you said, we're going to drop anything, but what might be the primary focus. So thank you for that example.
Yeah, sure.
I want to point to one more thing very quickly, just to make the point that you can actually use it to track outcomes depending on what your organization or project outcomes are. And then I want to show you a couple examples of memos, and then we'll wrap up. We'll have time for questions. So here I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. In this same project that I just talked about, Workstation Wednesday, we had them actually track changes that they made and prevention activities they started to implement. So in this case, these were the main outcomes of this project, obviously in theory leading to eventually to changes in violence, but this was the goal of this project. So we basically wanted to know what kinds of changes they were making, and we were going to use it to tailor TA so that they could really get to those community level changes. So our good enough data is we reviewed the documented changes to date. And again, we used opportunities that we had to interview people to provide some context of what was happening. And in this case, this was kind of the main outcome. So we had a fairly long memo, a 5-page memo, that might be the longest. And the debrief and decisions. Well, one, good news, they were all documenting organizational changes. That was one of the things they were funded to do, so that makes a lot of sense. They really thought the greatest benefit in this workstation, they could actually see what other coalitions were doing. It was very transparent, and that was actually the most helpful part, not their own tracking, which was very interesting to learn. And they were honest. They said, like, really, we're doing this more because our funders telling us to do it than for our own use. They were much more interested in understanding the prevention activities piece of this rather than their own organizational changes in terms of using data. So this is a case where we actually decided not to act, right? But we had data to support it. We said, okay, well, this is what they're really interested in. So we're not going to really push on them using their organizational data. We have a clearer understanding of why it's more exciting to them to think about the prevention activities. They are actually making organizational changes and documenting it. So for now, we're not going to take additional steps to provide TA to get them to use the organizational piece. And that's legitimate as well. I think it was supported. What I want to show you, I don't have any more and I don't have permission to use the rapid feedback memos with data in it for those. But I do have some examples from some other work, and also just to show you that you can use it in any context. One thing I want, this is for our DRPH program and a rapid feedback cycle I did with our DRPH program director on mentoring, which had come up, and I see one of our illustrious graduates on the call, but this had come up as feedback, but more anecdotal feedback from several DRPH students. And so the program director said, this is really worth understanding more. I was teaching a class in methods, a DRPH class. So he was like, oh, we have kind of a convenient sample here of people to get some things going. And so a couple of things I want to show you. I'm not going to go through the whole cycle that we did, but one is this is what a brief could look like. This one's actually 3 pages. But one of the things I've started to do is actually develop things in PowerPoint that people can open up in landscape. That's how we tend to look at things these days. So you can create versions of this that are really easy that people don't have to print out a copy or look at. And basically, we did all of the steps that we have gone through in the other examples. And this is kind of what we ended up, a couple of pieces of data on each slide. And then on the left-hand side, you can just see the high-level summary. And this was really input to start. And I'm sorry about my voice, but I've been struggling with keeping my voice all week. But basically, we started there and then developed a very brief survey that went out to everyone, all of the DRPH students. And we kind of said, there's something here, you know, by where they are in the program. So we were able to look at that and look at what mentors that they had, what their needs were, what was being met, and what wasn't. And I also interviewed DRPH advisors, which was a very kind of low level kind of data collection that we did to understand their perspective. So you can see this kind of maps on to the steps in the sense of we had some data, we did debrief, the program director came and actually had a town hall with DRPH students, initially met with people in my class, but then opened it up to everyone. We did some of the sense making, the so what, and then actually identified some specific steps that could be implemented in terms of mentorship activities, networking activities, etc. And then finally, I do want to make the point that this can also be used in kind of more comprehensive evaluation. And the example I want to share is one from my work when I was at CDC during the COVID-19 response. And I was a part of a group of 10 people within the agency that were asked to come together and look at how can we get more rapid feedback that can feed back into decisions that leaders are making. Because we know we collect great data, but when you field a survey, it might take 3 months. And this, as you know, is a pandemic that was changing daily. So if you're interested in, and I have the citation for the overall article, but just to show you how one way we used this, we had a question. In this case, it was the extent to which vaccines are helping school communities feel more comfortable about returning to in-person learning. You remember those days? So there were some traditional methods, but we also used crowdsourced surveys, social media listening, and then some focus group data. So this is an example of a more complex kind of rapid feedback cycle that obviously had professionals who do evaluations supporting it. But really what we wanted to know is, are we getting comparable information as we would get in some of these more traditional sources? And so you can see it was used to develop a specific recommendation that could be acted upon. So just again, it's just also another example of a way you could design a rapid feedback memo to really have, I mean, there's a lot summarized in a little bit of information. So the takeaway here, and then we do have some time for questions. I hope you take this away with you, which is rapid feedback can improve your organization and projects. And there, again, there actually is research and data that supports that very thing. You might already be doing it in some form. In fact, you likely are. You talked about that at the beginning. And there may be other ways that now, through some of these examples, and again, there are other examples in the 2 articles I mentioned, you might think about, well, what are these other data sources that we have within our organization that we could be using to do more of this? It is a type of evaluation, and you might not think of yourself as an evaluator, but a lot of how it's used is not used directly by evaluators, but by project teams. And write it down. We use for Delta Prep all of our rapid feedback memos. I think we had 10 by the end to actually do things like write background sections of articles, do all kinds of presentations for different audiences. We had information at hand when we had to talk to leadership, and we could look back on what we had. So it's also documenting what we did and how we did it to help explain not only what we delivered, but the outcomes that we got. And so with that, maybe you could tell us what is one way you could use rapid feedback to improve your work, maybe a way that you hadn't thought about it before. Please feel free to use the chat, but also we're not that big of a group. So feel free to also come off mute if you have any questions or comments, but we'd love to hear if this has maybe sparked some thinking about other ways you could use rapid feedback in your work. Okay. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Are you, Catherine?
Not yet. Might
Not
have to
yet.
give everyone a
You
moment.
give people time for sure.
I'll step up and just mention, I think I love this idea of just being open to making adjustments and making tweaks, because I think, people, we get these good ideas during meetings, and we get into action and implement these things and think that they're great ideas, but being able to, I think, measure them and determine, are we really getting the outcomes that we want is really important. And being willing to accept, okay, that may have been a great idea, but it's really not, it's not helping us get to where we want to go. So trying to think through changes, I think is a cool idea.
Yeah.
And we have a question in the chat. Does the PRC have capacity to assist community coalitions in developing these types of evaluation plans?
Daniel Driffin, who was a DRPH student, now graduate, Dr. Driffin. Thanks for your question. I mean, I don't know that I can answer on behalf of the entire PRC, but what I can say is we could definitely support in terms of other tools that we have. And I would be happy to have a conversation with you, Daniel, about what you have in mind and see if there is a way that we could support something. I don't know if others from the PRC have comments to that, or if Daniel, you want to provide any more context.
Yeah, thank you. And again, it's great seeing your beautiful faces, everyone. I think one of the biggest things that I see oftentimes, especially in the implementation aspects of communities doing the work, is communities just don't have time to go through these types of cycles, in addition to communities maybe not having the capacity to write up a white paper and push it through, a journal or even something, open access. So I'm just wondering, additional strategies or additional opportunities where PRC, may be able to come in partnered with the community and everyone win. Because I definitely think there's amazing public health activities going on, but they just are not at the level of where everyone can benefit from the knowledge gained and tweaked to really move it to the next step.
Yeah, that's a great point. And even though we wrote it up because we wanted to kind of talk about the framework, most of what's happening in organizations, as you said, people don't have time, and it's not like being written up in a way that's shared beyond whatever the group or organization to keep it really simple. And I can share some tools that might even facilitate that. And again, just to your point, recognizing that this may not be fully implemented in the way that it's laid out here. And it may actually just be thinking about, well, what is the information we already have? Like we don't have time to collect new data. But a lot of it is just how we could all just use the information we already have in ways that we can reflect on it and say, like, how do we move forward? So some of that is the actual structure of the process, and other are really facilitation techniques and how to do that move. So I'd be happy to talk more with you about that, but I think it's a very important point. The time and resources is really one of the big obstacles sometimes, or challenges to actually doing this, or perceiving that it's even possible. So thank you. I see we really are at time. Um, And so I want to thank you all. If there are any other final questions, um, and I see Catherine's comment. Yeah, of course. Um, their uncertainty is a big part of, right, what we're prioritizing right now, just in general. And I think Amy's example is a great example of how, even in the context of a regular meeting, there might be ways to use this. But I just, want to acknowledge we are all really grappling with kind of what's happening in the larger environment. I want to thank you. I actually love working with groups on this. And so I will get with Catherine and think about the tools that maybe we could share out, not necessarily today, but we could share at a later date. I just need to look through and think how we might want to bundle that to send out. But thank you. And any final thoughts from Catherine or Amy? We are right at the top of the hour.
There's one comment in the chat that says, I like the idea of clarifying things as a first step to evaluation. And I think that is really a great comment. And I feel very much the same, that that is a really important step. And it feels like a big undertaking, but it really is really helpful as you go through the next steps. I just wanted to highlight that comment from Crispin.
Thank you, Crispin. All right, well, I guess that will end this webinar. And again, I want to thank you. If you have other questions, I can stay on, but I think Catherine's going to stop the recording. And we hope to see you at our next webinar on evaluative